Have you ever had someone do something small for you? Something so ordinary that it almost felt silly to explain, but yet suddenly you were trying not to cry? Maybe they remembered how you take your coffee. Maybe they turned on the lamps instead of the big light without having to be asked. Maybe they saved you a seat where your back faced against the wall. Maybe they used a softer tone because they could tell you were overwhelmed. Maybe they did something tiny that made the moment easier, gentler, or more livable. And your mind immediately said, "This isn't a big deal. Get it together." But your body knew differently. It knew it wasn't just a coffee order. It wasn't just a light preference or that there was a saved seat for you. It wasn't that somebody used a softer tone. It was that sometimes the smallest acts of care do not feel small at all. They feel like the biggest form of love there is. Here's an example from my life. Recently, my husband was getting me a nighttime snack. He brought me hazelnuts and dates, but instead of putting them together in one bowl, he put them in two separate bowls. Hazelnuts in one, dates in the other. And when he handed me the two bowls, he said very casually, "I know you don't like your food to touch, so I thought this made sense." That was it. No grand announcement of his love, no patting himself on the back to say, "Look how thoughtful I am." Just two bowls. And it nearly knocked the wind out of me. My chest tightened, my throat burned, the tears started to come and well in my eyes. And immediately, an old voice showed up to say, "Megan, don't be silly. It's just two bowls. Get yourself together." But it wasn't just two bowls. My body knew before my mind did. What moved me was not simply that he remembered a preference of mine, it was that my preference had already been included in the ordinary math of his day. He was not dealing with me. He was not accommodating me while resenting it. He was not making me explain what I needed and why I needed it. He was just living with me in mind. And I cannot think of anything more loving than that. When you've spent your life believing that your needs are too much, being considered can feel almost impossible to process. I have a lot of sensory issues, like a lot. Loud noises make me anxious, certain textures make me nauseous, the big light feels aggressive, the sound of chewing can send rage through my entire body. I have to cut the tags out of everything I own. I have very strong opinions about spoons, and for most of my life, those things were treated like problems. I was called dramatic, too sensitive, a baby, a princess, difficult, ridiculous, and much, much worse. So I learned to do the math myself. I learned to scan every room before my body would relax in it. I needed to know, where are the exits? How loud is it? What lights are on? What smells are in the room? What textures might I have to tolerate? What am I allowed to ask for here? What should I hide? What can I laugh off before someone else turns it into a joke? My needs didn't just disappear, but asking for them to be considered often came with a cost I wasn't willing to pay. And I know I'm not the only one who learned this. Maybe your needs weren't sensory. Maybe you learned that your emotional needs were too much. Maybe you learned that your pace was too fast or too slow or just inconvenient. Maybe you learned that your grief made people uncomfortable or that your boundaries disappointed people. Maybe you learned that being sensitive was something you needed to apologize for. Maybe you learned that being easy was safer than being honest. So you became very good at doing the math. You calculated everyone else's comfort before your own. You figured out what it would cost to keep the room calm. You decided what you could tolerate, and you made your needs smaller before anyone else had the chance to reject them. And when you live that way for a long time, consideration feels strange. It can feel exposing. It can feel tender in a way that almost hurts the heart. Because suddenly someone is not asking you to disappear from the equation. They're including you in it. And this is why small acts of care can bring us to tears. It's not that we're fragile or dramatic or that the gesture itself is all that enormous. It's that the body understands what it means to be met without having to make a case for yourself first. Sometimes the tears are relief, that we don't have to explain or defend or shrink the need, that we're just allowed to fully exist here. And sometimes the tears are grief, because we didn't know it could be this simple, that we were allowed to need these things, that someone could notice us and our needs without making us feel like a burden, that we didn't know how much effort we were spending while trying to be easy. Being loved can bring grief to the surface because gentleness frequently reveals what harshness has taught us to normalize. So when someone makes room for you without resenting you, and suddenly it's all the ache of the places where you had to for room can come to the surface. When someone remembers a small thing, you can suddenly feel the ache of all the times you weren't remembered. When someone considers your needs without making them a problem first, you might suddenly feel all the times that you were treated like your needs were evidence against you. That doesn't make the care that you experience less beautiful. It makes it more honest. Sometimes love and grief arrive together, and sometimes being considered can feel like both the relief of your needs being met and the sorrow for how long you had to go without that kind of ease. So, if an act of care has ever made you emotional, I seriously doubt you were overreacting. I'd bet your body was recognizing it as safety. Maybe some part of you finally felt like you didn't have to disappear to be loved. Because the opposite of being too much is not having zero needs, it's having your needs belong in the equation. I want to say that again because it's important. The opposite of being too much is not having zero needs. It's having your needs belong in the equation. And yes, it is absolutely beautiful when someone does that for us. We need it. We're social beings. We need to be known, considered, remembered, loved, and cared for by other people. That is incredibly human. But we can also practice with this on ourselves. So here's the invitation. Sometime today, ask yourself, what would change if my needs were allowed to be part of the daily math? Not after you're depleted or resentful, and not after your body is screaming for relief. But what about now, in one ordinary moment? Maybe that means you dim the lights, or you choose softer clothing, or you eat from the bowl you actually love. Maybe you take the side streets instead of the freeway. Maybe you leave 5 minutes earlier so your body doesn't have to rush. Maybe you tell the truth instead of pretending something is fine. It doesn't have to make sense to anyone else. It doesn't have to be justified by some long explanation. You're just looking for one small act of self-consideration that is your way of saying, I'm included here too. And after you do it, pause for a breath. Let your body notice what it feels like. And then say silently or out loud, my needs belong in the equation. Because this practice isn't about pretending that self-consideration replaces the need to be cared by others, but it is about giving your body one small experience of not being left out of your own life. Because sometimes love isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't arrive as a speech, a promise, or a white horse. Sometimes it's someone noticing what would make the moment softer and choosing to do that for you without making you ask for it first. Sometimes it's two bowls. Sometimes it's turning the lights down. Sometimes it's a softer tone or a remembered coffee order. Sometimes it's just being included in the quiet calculations of an ordinary day. And if that brings tears to your eyes, maybe the small thing was never small. Maybe your body knows exactly what it means. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to know it counts. If you'd like to learn more about letting in moments of joy, love, delight, wonder, rest, and ease after living in survival mode, I hope you'll subscribe. But no matter what, please know that your needs deserve to be included in the daily math. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you next week.